What's up, Raiders Nation? We've got some major news coming your way. The Raiders have just signed an explosive pass rusher, and we've got the inside scoop on an NFL insider report about Antonio Pierce's future with the team. Plus, we'll dive into the upcoming draft and what Mark Davis and Tom Brady might be secretly planning for the Raiders' future. You don't want to miss this. Stick with me till the end. So, starting from the new signing, the Las Vegas Raiders just made a move by signing pass rusher Andre Carter. This is quite interesting, not because Andre Carter is a superstar just yet, but because he's a low-risk, high-reward kind of player. He's in his second year in the NFL and has stuck around on the Vikings practice squad for 2 straight seasons. For the Raiders, this move makes a lot of sense. Carter has some potential and upside, and that's exactly what the Raiders need right now. Carter is a smart player with a solid football IQ. He's long, he's got length, and he has the tools to develop into a strong football player. But like most developmental players, the key for Carter is getting consistent reps, developing his game, and continuing to grow. He's not unlike Kalavan Chasson, who went from being drafted by the Jacksonville Jaguars, cut by the Carolina Panthers after just one offseason, and then the Raiders picked him up and developed him into a productive player. It's that same kind of story that could unfold for Carter, and I'm excited to see what he can do. With Rob Leonard, the defensive line coach, leading the way, the Raiders have one of the best coaches in the league to help bring Carter's game along. Before the 2023 NFL Draft, some people even considered Carter a potential first-round pick, but injury and a lack of competition at Army hurt his draft stock. Still, the fact that he's been able to stay on an NFL roster for 2 seasons says a lot about his potential. Now, with Max Crosby out due to an ankle injury and Janarius Robinson suspended for 3 games due to PED violations, the Raiders needed to bring in some depth. The fact that they were able to snag Carter from the Vikings practice squad is huge. Not only does this mean Carter will now have a chance to make an impact, but he's also getting a nice bump in pay by moving from the practice squad to the 53-man roster. Now, turning your attention back to the bigger picture, there's also some news about the coaching situation. A report came out from Josina Anderson where she discussed the Raiders potentially moving on from head coach Antonio Pierce. The headline caught everyone's attention, and it doesn't paint a pretty picture. Anderson writes that the Raiders are entertaining the idea of getting a new head coach, and it seems like general manager Tom Telesco might be pulling back behind the scenes. It's an interesting and a bit concerning report. While constantly firing head coaches is a bit frustrating, but this also makes sense that management is making sure the team is headed in the right direction. The Raiders might be at a crossroads here. If the Raiders end up moving off of Pierce, it could have a lot to do with the availability of top coaching candidates. Ben Johnson, offensive coordinator for the Detroit Lions, is one of those candidates. If the Raiders are able to grab the #1 overall pick and Johnson is available, it could be a game changer for the future of this franchise. The fact that Anderson mentioned Telesco separating himself behind the scenes makes it sound like there's something more going on. And with Mark Davis reportedly disappointed with Pierce's performance, the writing might be on the wall. Now turn your attention to the even bigger picture, the upcoming draft. The situation is getting really interesting here. The Las Vegas Raiders dropped their 10th straight Monday Night Football game in Week 15, this time against the Atlanta Falcons. Let's be real, this wasn't just a tough loss for the Raiders, it was a bad football game all around. Neither team looked sharp, and the offensive play from both sides left a lot to be desired. Let me give you a quick review. The Raiders' offense was rough out there. The run game was completely non-existent, which has unfortunately become a recurring issue. This game marked Desmond Ritter's first start, and it's fair to say it was far from impressive. The offense was overly conservative, and Ritter seemed hesitant to take any risks. He looked nervous and hesitant to throw the ball downfield, resulting in an offense that relied on short, safe passes. It was the very definition of a dink-and-dunk approach, and there was almost no attempt to push the ball vertically. After starting the season at 2-2, the team is now looking at the possibility of finishing 2-15. At this point, there's no upside to winning any of the remaining 3 games. In fact, losing out might be the best scenario to secure a top draft pick and focus on rebuilding for the future. Speaking of the draft, that's where things get interesting. Currently, the Raiders are sitting in position for the #1 overall pick, but there's been some controversy and conflicting reports about how the draft order shakes out. There's been some back and forth between the Raiders and the New York Giants over who actually holds the top spot if the season ended today. Field Yates recently released an updated NFL draft order, and according to his latest report, the Raiders are sitting at #2, but some sources have the Raiders listed at the top spot. The main point of confusion seems to come down to how the tiebreaker is determined. Traditionally, the tiebreaker was based on strength of schedule, and that's what most reports seem to align with. However, according to the NFL's own wording, it gets a bit tricky. Based on this official information, the tiebreaker is said to involve something called strength of victory. Now, this is where things get a little confusing. Does strength of victory mean the same thing as strength of schedule? If it does, then the Raiders should hold the number one overall pick. But if strength of victory refers to something else, like the quality of the wins each team has, then the outcome could shift. Here's where it gets tricky for the Raiders. If the tiebreaker is based on the quality of wins, we might actually lose out on the top spot. Why? Well, somehow, the Raiders managed to beat the 9-5 Baltimore Ravens back in week 2. That one surprising win could come back to haunt them in this situation. Meanwhile, the New York Giants, with their own set of wins, might end up with the number one overall pick instead. It's definitely a confusing situation, and I'm sure many fans are wondering the same thing. If any of you have thoughts or insights into how this works, feel free to share them, because it's still not entirely clear. Like the race to the top, the race to the bottom this year has been absolutely wild too. There are so many bad teams sitting at 3-11, which makes every game critical in determining draft position. That's why even one win at this point could completely derail things. It's crazy to think about, but if the Raiders had managed to pull off a win yesterday, just one Hail Mary away, really, they could have gone from having the top pick to dropping all the way to the 7th overall pick. That's a massive swing for just one win, and it really highlights how tight this race to the bottom is. Now, looking ahead to the next game at Allegiant Stadium, it's shaping up to be what some are calling the ultimate tank bowl. The Raiders are set to face the 3-11 Jacksonville Jaguars, another team struggling through a tough season. It's hard to predict how this one will play out, but with so much on the line for draft positioning, it's safe to say this game carries a lot more weight than the records might suggest. Now, looking ahead to next Sunday, it seems like Aiden O'Connell is expected to get the start. Honestly, O'Connell gives the Raiders a better chance to win compared to Desmond Ridder. As I mentioned earlier, Ridder looked terrible on Monday Night Football against his former team. While he's an athletic quarterback who can use his legs, he seemed overly hesitant and lacked confidence in his throws. On top of that, his accuracy issues made it hard for the offense to find any rhythm. Switching gears to another topic, there's been some troubling news off the field. Defensive end Charles Snowden was recently involved in a DUI incident. Reports suggest his car was found on the side of the road, and judging by the pictures, it's clear this was a serious situation. There has to be more accountability, especially when it comes to off-field behavior. And honestly, what's even more surprising is that Charles Snowden is still on the roster. When I look at this team, I have to point the finger at the leadership, starting with head coach Antonio Pierce. He's supposed to be a player's coach. He needs to find a way to get control of this team. It's especially concerning for Pierce, whose job security isn't guaranteed. These incidents definitely won't help his case if he wants to remain the head coach next season. It's crazy how things have unfolded this year. Lastly, there's some tough news on the injury front. Running back Sincere McCormick is expected to miss the rest of the regular season, which is a huge blow for him and for the offense. McCormick was honestly one of the few players who gave fans hope. Every time he was on the field, he brought that spark. A young running back with a lot of potential, someone who could really make a name for himself. He had been looking solid out there these past few weeks, and it's a shame we won't get to see more of him this season. So that's all, Raider Nation. We'd love to hear your thoughts on the state of this team right now. What do you think? Is this season just a write-off, or do you see hope in any areas? Let me know in the comments below. Thanks for tuning in, and I'll see you in the next one.